Welcome to Tales of Britain and Ireland. This is a podcast telling the stories, legends and folktales of Britain and Ireland in no particular order. Presented by Graham and coming direct from South Yorkshire, each episode tells a story or selection of stories from all across these islands and throughout their history, followed by a short and decidedly inexpert discussion of the origin and themes of each tale. And welcome back, everyone. I'm not going to dilly-dally around the introduction here, but just as a quick note, if you are one of the very small number of people who are listening to this both before the 14th of June 2025 and you live in or around Nottinghamshire, then on that date, Saturday the 14th of June, I will be hosting a live event telling stories of forests. It's an entirely new live event and I'll be telling it in a forest. You can check out my website or my socials for more details. And the second thing to say is that this is a fairy tale episode, and appropriately, that means it's particularly gruesome in parts. Might be one to skip for small children, or at least to listen first and make your own decision. Okay, that said, let's get on with the story of Gold Tree and Silver Tree. A story that sort of combines together two better known fairy tales, which you might recognise if you squint a bit, but is very much its own thing. And as we get into it, I've got an extra special treat for you. I've got not one, but two mysterious prologues, which some storytellers might think is too many. I think quite a lot of storytellers would think any mysterious prologue is unnecessary in a folktale, but I respectfully disagree. And I think that as this story in particular will, by its end, challenge usual assumptions as to allowed numbers of certain things, I'll keep that vague there, I think it's altogether appropriate. This is the story of Gold Tree and Silver Tree, and let's begin with mysterious prologue number 1. There are 9 hazel trees that surround the pool at the end of the world. But no ordinary trees these. Cloaked in a mist of wizardry, the knowledge of the world flows through their roots, up into their trunks and along their branches. And at the branches' tip, soft hazelnuts grow, shells hardening as they mature, the fruit within infused with wisdom, truth and beauty, flashes of enlightenment play across their shells. And when the nuts fall from the tree into the pool which formed at that spring from which all the waters of the world flow, well, some are eaten by fish whose minds are overcome by jolts and pulses, shivers of electrochemical stimulation that rush through their neurons, great bursts of insight revealing the entire interconnectedness of all creation laid out clear in front of them before slowly fading as they swallow. It was one hell of a trip. The husks, still coated with flakes of wisdom, were washed down the river and out into the 5 streams where they mingle with the waters of the world. And very occasionally, somewhere far, far away, a fish, quite a usual fish, in the ordinary course of its life, swimming around, doing nothing in particular, would chance upon one of those husks of hazelnut shell, crunch down upon it, and have its life changed forever. A synaptic explosion that engulfed its mind. This fish now knew all that there was to know, and it knew too its role in this vast universe, its tiny life in a tiny pond swimming around the same old waters day after day, until the end, which would come ever so fast, ever unable to experience the beauty of a mountaintop sunset, soar into the sky, reach the infinite depths of the heaven above, and so much besides. Its perspective on its existence was irrevocably altered. And just sometimes, all that knowledge would drive the fish quite mad. Mysterious Prologue, the second. Why are the people in horror movies so dumb? A common refrain that, Why do they do such stupid things that are so obviously going to lead them into bad situations? And setting aside where that is just clearly true, where the characters are written unrealistically for the convenience of the plot, concentrating instead on those times where I want to give horror movie writers the benefit of the doubt. Well, a lot of the time the audience is unaware of quite how lofty a position they occupy. Awareness of the existence of a narrative and that character's place within it. They underestimate how much better their decisions can be simply as a result of that little bit of perspective. This is a film. Someone will die. Ghosts might exist. That creepy little toy might come to life and strangle you with your own intestines while singing an advertising jingle. These are things the audience understands, but characters can be more than forgiven for not recognising. So I cut Rose some slack. Our female protagonist, unaware that she is in a narrative. She moves into a new place, a home with her husband, a large castle, for he is a rich and titled man. It has been a whirlwind romance. She's from a royal family and she didn't expect romance from a marriage. But he has been wonderful to her. No marriage of convenience this. Yes, she has had to move away from her family and friends and countrymen. So she is alone in this house. Not actually alone, of course. These are times back in the distant past, and her and her husband are rich, so she's only alone in that the servants who now answer to her as the lady of the house are strangers to her, as are all the people in the villages and towns thereabouts. For this is a marriage not just across households, but whole countries. But the people seem pleasant enough, as such people go. Nevertheless, she is rich person alone. But truly that matters little because her and her new husband are in love. Rose is happy, and as far as Rose can tell, he appears to be happy too, mostly. Though some days he does develop a somewhat more morose character, spends some time brooding alone, his face heavy as though under cloud. But no anger is ever directed at her, and so she barely pays attention to these little episodes. He's just got an extended emo phase, and it really is no bother to her. She uses her time to understand her new home. The household is, of course, her domain, and she must get to grips with it. Organising the staff, logistical stuff, budgeting even. A role of a rich wife is more like the CEO of some grand hotel, always having to make sure they can entertain the guests and the whole place keeps running and the like. And she does her job well, and that is fulfilling, and in the time she's not doing that, she is, say, pleasing. No, not pleasing, more equitable. She is engaged in play with her husband, which actually occupies quite a lot of her time because things are going very well between. He has just one rule about the household, a peculiar one, that she might go anywhere she wishes, except for one room, which was forbidden to her, and always kept locked, and the key he kept on his person at all times. And now some of you listeners are already beginning to bring your knowledge of story to this setup. And you might be able to feel a worry rising for this young, innocent, happy woman. The hairs may be standing up on the back of your neck. You may be whispering to her, "Get out, Rose. Get out now." She doesn't recognise the story, an awful story that has been told in many variants across many lands for centuries, probably because it's a story based in a good deal of truth. So rather than afraid, she is intrigued by the room she must not enter, curious. What could be in there? Riches? His diary? At first, she almost forgets it. She's got enough to focus on, but as months pass and she gets more familiar with her new life, well, her curiosity is increasingly piqued. She's interested enough that when her husband leaves for, a medieval business trip one day and accidentally leaves the key behind, she just can't resist a sneaky peek. "Don't do it, don't go in," we're all shouting at her, as, in a state of blissful ignorance, she takes the large heavy key to the large heavy door, inserts it in the appropriately large heavy keyhole. No wait, keyholes are holes, holes can't be heavy. In the large keyhole, she turns the key, there is a click, she pushes against the door, which swings open. into the room she steps and... Of course, already you know what is in there. A woman. Quite dead. Laid out on the bed. And let's not mess around here. This is not just any woman, but her husband's first wife. And the second living wife looks down at the corpse, a corpse somehow preserved as achingly beautiful as she herself. And she is transfixed by the awful sight, an icy terror fills her heart, and the large heavy door slams shut behind her. They fuck you up, your mum and dad. It was somewhere in Scotland, in a kingdom in the past long before the country was unified. But it could have been a great many places, at least those with a monarchy, which has unfortunately been quite a lot of them. For there was a king and a queen, and they had a daughter, and sort of pleasingly the king doesn't get a name, but the mother and daughter do. They are not just queen and princess, and please forgive my pronunciation here, the mother was called Cruv Irichet, which means silver tree, and the daughter was called Cruv Or, which means gold tree. Now, these are strange names, and I think not just to us now and in English, but also as Gaelic names go and within the world in question. But rich people do so often have strange names. These were the X-A12 type names of their day, possibly coming from an even more dysfunctional family, as difficult as it is to believe. Now, responsibility for the strangeness of these names mostly rests on the Queen's parents for calling her Silvertree in the first place. But she and the king clearly leaned into this with calling their daughter Goldtree. And they implicitly dared anyone who'd comment on it to do so. But they didn't, of course, because royalty. At our story's start, Goldtree is grown up. The details of her life to this point are a mystery, but given what is about to transpire, I strongly suspect it wasn't plain sailing. At our story's start, the unnamed king is returning home after a day at the king office. I'm not sure. Maybe just from one part of the castle to the other. The advisors and the plotting part of the castle to the home part of the castle. Or possibly he'd been hunting, which is about 90% of what kings seem to do in folk stories at least. Princess Goldtree was off doing her princess things, tapestry needlework, gossiping with handmaidens, or maybe even, inverted commas, gossiping with handmaidens, inverted commas, needlework, inverted commas, no, that one doesn't work. You understand what I'm getting at here, at least, I think, though. But it was not his daughter that concerned the king, for when he arrived home he was greeted with news from anxious servants. The Queen was ill. She had returned from riding earlier in the day and taken immediately to her bed. She looked white as snow, terribly ill, at a time when illness so often preceded death. He rushed to her bedside, worried, for he was greatly concerned for her. Now, a theme that will sort of be behind the events of quite a lot of this story is that within royal marriages there's often a power element at play, rival camps here. Whole families use their spouses to jostle for position. This often favours the man, but occasionally it can be the other way around, depending upon who has the stronger claim to the throne, for instance, or supplies the armies. And perhaps here the king was the outsider in a kingdom where lineage mattered more than sex. That might explain some of what is to come. Or perhaps he was just a real wife guy. I'm getting away from the point here. The point is that he cared about her for one reason or another, and when he found her pallid, stretched out across her bed, back of hand perhaps dramatically touched to her forehead, well, he was very worried. He knelt down, took her hand, and asked her what was wrong. Slowly she turned her head to look at him, eyes puffy from crying. "Oh, my love." She held his gaze for a second, enough to convey a deep sadness seeming to come from within her very soul. Then she closed her eyes and turned away, fresh tears forming on her cheeks. Her voice was at least clear of the raspiness that might signal some of the worst conditions, but it was hardly reassuring. "My dear, what is it?" "I'm sick, so very sick," the king fretted. She continued, "My darling, I know the source of this sickness. And there is one thing that could cure me." The king gasped at the good news. Well, quickly tell me what it is, and if it is within my power, and my power is vast, then I shall grant it." She turned back to look at him, up at his loving face. "Oh, but it is such a great ask, dear. I'm not sure if I—" He beheld her with a great seriousness. "My darling, I swear to you, if you know how this malady may be remedied, then I will do anything to do so. I love you dearly. You are my heaven and earth, and I shall move both to aid you. Just give me your word. Tell me what you wish of me." "Anything?" "Anything." "Okay." She took a deep breath. "I need you to bring me the heart and liver of Princess Gold Tree so I may eat them." There was a long silence. The king said and did nothing, and then he blinked twice in rapid succession. "Gold Tree, our daughter, you know her," said Queen Silvertree, as if that might be the issue. "Yes." Almost imperceptibly the king was shaking. "I know who she is." "Then you'll do it for me. Fetch me her heart and liver so I may eat them." The king was disassociating. "Darling," said the queen. Yes, sorry, where was I?" "You promised you'd help me." "I did. Anything you said." "Anything for you, darling. So, will you do it? Will you fetch me them so I may eat them?" "Yes, of course. You do understand that to do this I would have to kill our daughter, cut them out of her." Yes, that's right, you've got it." Oh, okay then. Just wanted to be sure." So you'll do it then?" "Yes, I do love you, darling." "I love you too, my dear." And the king left his wife's room, gently closing the door behind him. He managed to make it halfway down the long corridor before he let loose a maniacal ha 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 and punched at the air in front of him. The guards exchanged glances. It must be a serious illness. Grief does terrible things to the mind. Elsewhere in the castle, a blissfully unaware Princess Gold Tree continued to make sweet discussions with a handmaiden. What exactly do you do when a queen is going mad? Well, there are a number of options for mad women in history, most of them not so great for those afflicted. Thoughtful therapy or appropriate medicines these were not. Though a few options could be alright, good even. Convalescence somewhere in the countryside or the seaside, far away from everyone else. Cocaine, and of course mechanically induced paroxysms. But most were much darker than this. The attic or the asylum or worse beckons. However, for what I suppose to be the same sort of reasons the king was by necessity attached to his wife, he apparently wasn't in a position to try any of these. A day passed. He returned to his wife's bedside, hoping the nightmare had, well, been just that. But the demand was just the same. She ailed, and she was saddened, heard that he hadn't yet committed filicide, one of the most heinous crimes imaginable, butchered his own child, carved out her organs to feed her clearly insane mother. He was wandering the halls, wringing his hands by this stage. He did not even dare to see his daughter, thought he would break down if he did, studiously avoided her, and issued instructions that her mother was too ill to see her. Under no account was Goldtree allowed to see Queen Silvertree. Who knows what could happen? Couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't govern. Soon enough he was very ill himself. Well, on the third day the royal delegation from Denmark arrived. The palace was in a great upheaval. The Queen's absence was just about excusable. Women could be frail things, but there could be no question of the king not being there to receive his royal visitors. And so, though his mental state was as fragile as an egg in an avalanche, he had himself dressed by his servants in all his resplendent finery, and his daughter with him, he avoiding her gaze, trying not to think about it. The king, now teetering himself on the brink of insanity, went to greet his foreign visitors. Would it help if I told you the Queen did have her reasons? That she had not always been hell-bent on the murder and cannibalism of her own daughter? Maybe? Or perhaps not. For it turns out that the reason was perhaps even worse than pure, frothing, insane sadism. The Queen had taken a ride that fateful morning out into the beautiful foothills, amongst the heathers and through little clumps of woodlands and pine forests. All alone. Apart, of course, from the many attendants in tow carrying her various things and constantly vigilant, but they remained a respectful distance away. For her, this was lonely wandering. Rich people alone. She stopped to rest and eat by a small pool. There was the pleasing, gentle sound, a tinkling of water trickling in and out of it, but at the poolside itself the water was still. Sat upon the grass, Queen Silvertree had leaned over and gazed at her watery reflection. A pleasing sight indeed. She held back her hair to get a better view, posed for an ephemeral selfie. A quiet moment to herself. It was disturbed by a movement from under the water, and then the image of the Queen vanished into ripples as the head of a great silvery brown fish broke the surface of the water, seeming to look directly at her. The emergence of this fish delighted Silvertree no end. She smiled at it, and then playfully addressed it. "Oh, bonny little troutie, a fine-looking fellow you are, but—" And she put on a silly little face. "Would you not agree that, while you are a good-looking fish, I am the most beautiful woman in all the world?" And the trout, who had tasted of the essence of the magical hazelnut, saw the chance to do something oh so fun, to make its tiny role in this world just a little bit more interesting. In a voice that was its very best approximation of a human tongue, it managed to blub out one word. No. Well, actually, that's two words in Gaelic, which is probably the language the fish is speaking in this instance, but let's set that aside. The important thing is that the fish managed to convey to Silvertree, no. Silvertree stopped dead, heart beating hard against her chest. The fish just spoke. No, it must have been her imagination. Fish didn't talk. But the fish's head was still protruding from the water, gazing at her. She stammered, "You heard me," it said. "No." She was dumbfounded, her lips moving up and down silently, more fish-like than the fish itself. "No, you are not the most beautiful woman in all the world, if you've forgotten the question. I know these things. Once possibly you were, but now your daughter, she's grown up, well, no longer. For she is more beautiful than you." The Queen froze, the words cutting her so sharply she for an instant forgot the strangeness of the messenger. How do you know?" "I know things you couldn't even conceive, little Queen, things that would take your mind and snap it in two, would tip your world into chaos if I so much as whispered them. I know so many things, so you may trust me when I say that Goldtree is far more beautiful than her mother." The Queen recoiled as though she had been punched. No, it can't be. I'm the most beautiful." The trout gave a great wet fish laugh, smacking its lips together. And deep, deep down within Silvertree, something snapped. And it would never be fixed. Let us pause for a second, listener, just as those similarities to a certain other fairy tale I mentioned may be coming into view for you. Now, I think whatever role the magical fish plays in all of this, it's worth considering how awful a society must be to shape a person to have insecurities as great as silver trees. Yes, there might be a bit of nature in that nurture versus nature, I'll grant you that. People exposed to the same stimuli can turn out radically different. But in this case, well, Silvertree, the queen, ostensibly the most powerful woman in the kingdom, has been so shaken to her core by her beauty fading. All her worth so tied up in it, that she will, as we've seen, end up doing horrendous things. This is the substance type shit on mega steroids. It's not only general youth she is threatened by, but specifically her own daughters. And, well, it's not coming from nowhere, that is it. However unhinged her reaction might be, these insecurities had clearly been fostered within her since a very young age. She was her beauty, and without it she was nothing. A message reinforced every hour of every day of her life, and it had been received loud and clear, internalised, until it was basically all she was. And I really wish I could say that this was completely unrelatable to anyone's life today, that this sort of message belongs to the past, or even to legend only. But I'd be entirely mistaken if I were to make that claim. So, just for a hot moment, I want you to consider how wretched the Queen must feel to have anxiety so deep and powerful, how weak she must feel that every bit of her worth was tied up with the perception of her beauty to the extent that she could go on to become the person we see in this tale. Just sit for a moment and let us, me and you, have some understanding, some sympathy for her. And now we have done that, I shall not do so again. There is a societal utility in understanding the origins of the truly wicked, the most heinous. Realising how that awfulness is generated within the context of a society, that it does not stem from something innate in an individual, that things can change and people can be better. But none of this means that we should ignore calling a monster forged in the crucible of society exactly what it is, that we should side with it over its victims. And Silvertree was a monster indeed. Now the fish was, of course, wrong, or more likely just lying. Wrong because beauty is subjective. There are no absolute standards. The statement that any one person is the most beautiful is simply incoherent. Though, of course, it may well have been more right if it was talking in terms of some kind of standard, its own, or perhaps, more honestly, Silvertree's own. But if it was doing so, it didn't make that clear, and by that omission claimed a universality for its statement which is simply inaccurate. And it was probably just lying. But this did not occur to the Queen. She was deep in panic mode. Well, what can I do? Not sure I should say, said the fish with a mock coyness. Not sure it's my place. Do you know, little fishy? She looked pleadingly at it. Help me, please. Well, the fish considered. You know, you could always have your daughter killed. And perhaps surprisingly even to the fish, Silvertree didn't balk at this. And so it continued. Then she'd be dead, and you'd be the most beautiful again. Yes, that makes sense. But how would you remain the most beautiful? Asked the fish. There's always new young women, isn't there? They could grow up to be more beautiful than you. Unless... Well, said the know-it-all fish. It turned its head from side to side, and then leaned further out of the water, all conspiratorial-like. I'll tell you a secret. They don't want you to know it, but eternal beauty, youth, it comes from the young, stored in their body. Your daughter's heart and her liver, that's where it's found in its richest seams. Eat them, and you shall remain the most beautiful in all the land. The Queen's eyes widened, but not in horror, but with joy. At the promise of this relief from her lifelong anxieties, the threat of her beauty being eclipsed, gone. A hope for true freedom. Really, just eat her heart and liver? Yes, just gobble them all up. And it smacked its lips together like only a fish can. Thank you. I will remember you, little trout. The trout did a sort of bow. The queen got up from the poolside, a wild look of hope in her eyes. Now, she did not underestimate the enormity of what she was about to do, its utterly repugnant nature, its evil in the eyes of those who just wouldn't understand. But none of that was enough to stop her. She arose then, fully committed to her new path, an enraptured supplicant at the feet of the dark god of murder. Besides, she was queen, she wouldn't actually have to do the deed herself. And off she went. The trout was very pleased with itself. There was a glint of wild joy in its own mad eyes, joy at the chaos it was about to unleash on a world it could never directly be a part of. It sank beneath the waters of the pool and swam away. Now, you may be wondering at this point if the talking fish actually existed, whether what was reflected back at the queen in the pool were simply her own thoughts. It was when confronted by her own ageing face, she uncovered something that was within her already, and this is definitely a sort of compelling argument, but as you'll see later, the fish actually does have knowledge of the outside world, so we sort of have to assume that it's real, rather than a simple allegory for the evil and madness that might lurk just below the surface of humanity, though there's probably a bit of that too. It does occur to me, by the way, that if the queen hadn't wanted one day to be surpassed by her daughter, she should probably have not had one, but also really shouldn't have called her Gold Tree when she herself was called Silver Tree, asking for it, that one. Quite on the nose. Should have been Bronze Tree, that'd have done it. The nominative determinism was strong within her daughter. And all of that broadly brings us up to date. And to bring us back to where we were in the story, the king and Gold Tree are in a great big banquet thrown for the delegation from Denmark. I say Denmark, though obviously nation-states as they exist now didn't do so back then, some kingdom within the general geography of Denmark. The banquet is in full swing, if that's the terminology. You've got all the particulars I think I've described on this podcast before, wimples and jesters and lute strumming and pigs' heads and what have you. It's one of the classier types though, which I think is mostly distinguished between there being golden goblets filled with wine as opposed to flagons of ale banged on the table. A more courtly, polite type of banquet. Gentle laughter. The king has struggled to make proper conversation all night. He is deep in worry about how he's going to deal with his insane wife, and keeps looking at his daughter and being terrified by the sight of her. But there's been good efforts from courtiers and advisors doing the diplomacy bit, and the decadent meal, the junglers, the alcohol, it's all helping. But none of that is actually the most important reason that the king's rather subpar personal performance has not started to cause a diplomatic issue. No, that's more to do with the fact that the other party, the Danish, are preoccupied with their own worries. So desperate are they to make a good impression that their focus is all on their own behaviour, watching carefully that they are hitting all the correct beats of their part of this etiquette duet. So much so that they had no time to pay attention to whether the king was performing his bits. They needed him on side. They had to impress him, and if he was glum or given to random bursts of "Ag!" as he remembered what was happening, well, they would ignore that, his strange behaviour, that was fine. They would worry that it was in response to them and do anything they could to get him on their good side. For you see, they had an ulterior motive for being here. Their delegation was led by their crown prince, a young man keen to make his place in the world, sent by his fathers and his father's scheming and plotting advisors. And I mean that not in a negative way. If you're a monarch, a successful monarch, you want advisors that are scheming and plotting, as long as they're doing it on your behalf rather than solely for their own purposes. Though of course if the two should align, then that's even better. In this case, the schemes and plots were to build alliances, very important in an age where warfare was a constant and kingdoms were forever nervously looking over their ermine-draped shoulders at potential treacherous actions from their neighbours, while simultaneously coveting the rich farmlands and mines of their neighbours on the other side. Realpolitik demanded that alliances must be sought in such a circumstance. Yet precisely because of that circumstance, solid alliances were hard to come by. But there were a few time-honoured and tested methods of securing one. One of the oldest of these came about when there was a man and a woman in royal families, ideally of a similar age, but it certainly wasn't a requirement, who were both unwed. And the crown prince of this Danish kingdom? He was the same age as Goldtree. A perfect opportunity. If you want romance, well, I'm afraid that wasn't on anyone's mind. Though the prince this evening was paying some attention to Goldtree's appearance, maybe even her personality, he knew love wasn't the point of it, wasn't to be expected. She was a princess of the right age of a kingdom who had been judged to make a fine alliance, a piece in a great board game for riches and conquest, but also survival. And at some point during the banquet, after the crown prince had given the "okay, she looks good enough at least" signal, the king was informed of the true purpose of the delegation's arrival. Not just to trade wood for sheep or whatever the pretext had been. No, the prince would like to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. Now, I don't know how such things were done. I do know that he definitely didn't ask Goldtree's permission. Maybe he asked the king forthright and directly, or maybe messages were passed through intermediaries, so in the case the proposal was declined or more negotiations were needed, there was no direct loss of face. But eventually, the king came to hear of the prince's wishes, and any fears the prince might have had that the king would not accept or would drive a hard bargain, they were very soon wiped away. The king, when he shook himself out of his stupor enough to register the proposal that was being put to him, he immediately saw the out that this gave him. A great smile grew on his face until it threatened to burst it. "You want to marry Goldtree? Take her away to your country to be your wife, far away from here, a foreign land, where no doubt she'll have a lot of time to learn the language because, well, what else will she be doing but tapestries and babies? And you'll not be wanting to make the long sea voyage back and come to see her poor old parents any time. We'll probably have to live without her as if she was dead to us. Yes, that's what you want?" The prince was taken aback. "Well, yes, I suppose, but we might be able to visit." No, you couldn't. "And I could afford her every luxury with your dowry, I suppose." "Oh yes, you'll want a big dowry, won't you?" "Yes." "Don't worry, been saving it for years. I can give you whatever you want. Don't use any of it on ever coming back to see us, though, okay? That's the only stipulation." "Is this a yes?" Yes, it's a yes," said the king, shaking the prince's hand up and down, almost to the point it fell off. "A wedding! How wonderful! Tomorrow, did you say?" Did I?" "Of course you did, that's fine. Tomorrow's absolutely perfect. We'll have it all arranged. I'll cover it, don't you worry." And the king started clicking his fingers, summoning advisors who in turn talked to the people who actually arranged things. Soon people were leaving the hall. They had to start talking to the people who actually did things. And the king was just overcome with relief. His laughter was almost hysterical. Said the prince, who was understandably taken aback by this turn of events, with an increasing worry that he might be being conned here in a way that he couldn't quite identify. Maybe Goldtree wasn't as lovely as she appeared on the surface. Perhaps it was one of those curse situations where you can only pass it on to someone who accepts it willingly. Something like that. Nevertheless, he didn't really have any reason not to go through with it, so he did say, "Can I tell/ask Goldtree then?" "Oh," the king slapped his forehead. "Silly me, forget my own heart and liver if they weren't safely stored in my body, I would. Of course you can, but she will be saying yes." And the whole kingdom was soon abuzz with news of the shotgun wedding. And not only because she actually sort of fancied the prince. Not that one drunken evening is exactly the requisite time to make a proper judgment about someone's character, but she did like him. But more critically, she married him partly because her father ordered her to, and partly because at some point during this whole thing, her father must have explained it to her. To some degree at least. I don't think it came as that much of a shock to her. For Silvertree to go straight to full-blown murder of her daughter, I reckon there must have been a lot of signs already. Goldtree, unfortunately, didn't find it hard to accept that her mother wanted to kill her. And soon she was just as eager for the marriage as her father was. I don't know how she felt about her father. Was she sorry that he was trapped so? Or did she feel a justifiable burning anger that he was going to stay married to her insane mother and not, throw her in jail or maybe execute her? Okay, I'm speculating a lot even for me. Let's get back to the story. They kept the wedding from the Queen somehow. Not entirely sure of that bit. Work out your own reasons, not stated in the tale, loads of ways it could have happened. They kept it from her. And not just on the day of the wedding itself, which was a rushed-together affair. Had the vibe of a TV show where everyone was just in it for the money they'd make. Married at first sight combined with don't tell the mother of the bride. Guests were confused at their one-day invite. Many who should have been there couldn't make it. But monarchs were weird and all-powerful within their own kingdoms, so you just sort of shrugged your shoulders, cheered for the happy couple, and got on with your life, as the princess all of a sudden left the kingdom behind to start her new life. The day after the ship set sail, all the wedding paraphernalia that might have aroused suspicion was packed away. And everyone understood that no one was to talk to Silvertree about this. Maybe it was because she was so ill and she'd be sad about her daughter going away. It would upset her even more. Maybe that was the line. No, I'm speculating more on things that don't require speculating on. No one tells her, okay? After Goldtree was safely away, the king had a goat killed. And then he took its heart and liver, put them in a great big bowl and carried them to the Queen's bedchamber. "Have you done it?" she snarled from the bed where she had lain while all the castle was gripped by wedding fever. "Just as the doctor ordered, my dear. You'll be right as rain in no time." She's dead. She's dead." "Yes, my dear. She's dead." So wrapped in her own view of the world she was, that she didn't think to question his breezy, relieved tone, absent of any of the grief you would expect of a man who had butchered and carved his own daughter under duress. "Give it to me." The innards quivered, covered in blood. "You want it cooking, dear?" No, give it to me here." Silvertree grabbed hungrily at the offal, regarded it without suspicion. She gave out a gleeful laugh. She grabbed tight hold of what she took to be her daughter's heart, raised it to her mouth, took a great big messy bite. Blood arced out, its juices flowed between her fingers as she tore into the tough, raw meat. She looked up, face covered in fevered sweats, and the blood, and her eyes met her husband's while she still ripped and tore the flesh with her teeth. There was a genuine thanks in her eyes, and the relief she felt distracted from the taste. She was now the most beautiful woman in all the world. The monster sat in its bed in all its gory glory and feasted as far as she understood, upon her own child. "I'll just leave you to it then, my dear," said the king. He closed the door quietly behind him, muting the awful sounds of chewing and swallowing. He made it about halfway down the corridor before there was an acrid taste in his throat and he choked and vomit splashed violently all across the beautifully tiled floor. Now, we don't at this point have much of a sense of Goldtree's character, defined in our eyes as simply a vessel for her mother's hatred and by the prince's desire for her. Perhaps defined by her extreme beauty, but even that seems in doubt if we are as suspicious of the trout as I am. Her herself is an unknown, and I can't say we get a huge development on that now, but I am at least happy to report that whoever she was, she found living with the prince to be a damn sight better than living with her parents. No great surprise there, given what we know of them. But more surprising than that is that, given just a little bit of time, the relationship, entered into on both sides for reasons that had nothing at all to do with romance, nevertheless, it blossomed into something that all who saw the two of them together must recognise as love. By accident it may have been, but Gold-tree and our unnamed Danish prince, they fell deeply and passionately in love with one another. And yes, passionately is of course a euphemism here. They fell so hard for one another that it was practically embarrassing for anyone who had to watch them. This wasn't supposed to be how it worked out. Amicably was certainly good, but courtiers found themselves averting their eyes to avoid watching the young married couple flirt outrageously with one another. No, I love you more, I love you more, I love you more. I love you infinity, no backsies. All the time playing footsie with each other under the council table. The relationship improved them both. For Gold-tree, life had turned around a whole 180, and as her name suggested she might, she blossomed too. And they all lived happily ever after, right? Back in Scotland, the king and queen were still, well, king and queen, and they did not have such a happy relationship. Sourness was expected of royal couples, though the reason for this particular souring would have horrified all but the most cynical of conspiracy theorist-minded Republicans, who might be surprised to find their wildest child-eating accusations were firmly rooted in fact. For the king, I imagine it must be quite difficult to relate to a wife who thinks you've murdered your own daughter at her command. Not something even the elite of modern-day couples counsellors are really prepped for, never mind their more primitive counterparts back then who didn't even have the terminology of love languages. The king was lucky enough to have people loyal around him who would keep Gold-tree's real fate secret from her mother. And a whole year passed. Would you know it, the Queen happened to be riding again through that forest, happier now, convinced of her own superlative beauty, which is all that really matters, isn't it? Not that she was objectively attractive, no, just that no one else was more attractive than her. She was the one-eyed man who'd blind the world to be king. She came again to that pool in the forest wherein dwelt the trout, and she laid down again to look at her reflection in the waters, and marvel at just how fit she was. Oh, bonny wee troutie, remember me, the most beautiful woman in all the world? No, you're not, blub 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 the fish matter-of-factly. What do you mean? You aren't the most beautiful woman in all the world. But I did what you said. I ate my daughter's heart and liver. You told me that that would work. I must be the most beautiful now. She said all that without any trace of irony, no consideration of the broader concept of beauty that might be invalidated by being the kind of woman who ate her daughter's organs. I did tell you that, chided the fish, its mind all flooded with great cosmic wisdom. But you did not actually do that. For Gold-tree is living with a prince in Denmark, happily married, all organs intact. Very pretty she is. He is a very lucky man. No, fibbing, false fish, it cannot be. I ate them all up. And suit yourself then, but she is there. No. The Queen's mind whirled, her head hurt. No, he wouldn't. He wouldn't. She paused, thought on it more. He would. He would betray his wife just to save his wretched daughter. Was there really no one that she could trust? The king, that bastard! She let out a great wail so loud that the servant she'd left a little while off heard her, rushed to her aid. When they found her, she was standing over the pool, a look of grim determination and demonic malice upon her face. And behind her, though none of them noticed, there was a very wise and very cruel fish, laughing to itself before disappearing deep into the murky waters. Hello, darling, she greeted her husband when she returned. Nice ride, dear. Oh, lovely. It inspired me, actually. Think I might take a longer journey. Might be good for you, dear. Would be, wouldn't it? I was actually thinking of taking the longboat out for a spin. A jolly jaunt. Oh, excellent. Well, feel free. Yes, you see, I just thought it was high time that I paid Gold Tree a visit. In her home, in Denmark. Given I missed the wedding and all, should really drop in with a little gift, I was thinking. To celebrate her getting so much better after her heart and liver were cut out. Miraculous, really. And had she any lingering doubts as to the truth of the fish's word, her husband's expression told her everything she needed to know. Oh, yes, I'm sure she'll be missing her dear old mother. I've already given instructions for the longship to be prepared. Don't trouble yourself. I'll be back soon enough, darling. But don't wait up. I'll be sure to give our daughter your regards. And she swept out of the room, accompanied by a dramatic, evil, villainess theme tune, all organs and screechy violins. She managed to extract from terrified members of her retinue the location. Conveniently adjacent to the coast the castle of the prince was. The Queen took the helm of the longship herself, steered the ship well, better than anyone else in fact, and they arrived quickly enough. But she bided her time before going ashore, had people go to watch the castle while Goldtree and her loving prince lived. Their reports predominantly consisted of descriptions of how cute the couple were, how they gazed longingly at each other in moments of silence, swinging their arms together, braiding flowers in each other's hair, and just being devastatingly sickening all around. But they also reported back on the prince's movements. Silvertree waited until he had left, with a great hunting retinue, away for at least a day or two. Only then did the longship beach. Now, a fair bit of what happens next is somewhat difficult to explain if you just take the text as written, and you know how I like not to do that, and I desperately search for a narrative that makes it all make sense. So where we're going to end up is that the Queen, Silvertree, is outside of a room in which Goldtree is locked, claiming that she cannot get out. Trapped in, sorry about that, can't possibly come out to see you. And here's how I think we get there. Queen rocks up at the castle along with some guards. The servants in the castle know that she is the mother of Goldtree. Maybe she even introduces herself as such. There's seals and all that security protocol stuff. No one's suspicion is aroused. It's Goldtree's mother, come for a visit, lovely. The servants tell her that yes, Goldtree is in, but unfortunately her husband is out hunting, but of course she can come in and see her daughter. Inside the castle, Goldtree receives a message that her mother is here to see her. She is absolutely panicked, recognises the danger that she's in. If the prince was here with his men, they could force her out, but he is not. The castle is not the biggest of places, and the Queen and her own guards are starting to search for Goldtree now. Oh, daughter, dearest, come out, wherever you are. Come and give your old mum a kiss. Goldtree confides in the servants who are with her. Her mother is coming, not to greet her, but to kill her. They, in turn, panic. They don't have the people here to win a fight. Brains are racked. A light bulb appears above somebody's head, despite the fact that light bulbs haven't been invented yet. A candelabra. There's that room, the huge, heavy oaken door. If she was in there, she'd be safe. They lock Goldtree inside it, and the key is hidden. And because this is a highly misogynistic time when kings and queens didn't like one another necessarily, or even mostly, when the servants see Silvertree with her men looking for her daughter, they have an explanation ready. One that would seem highly suspicious to most of us, but in this particular context, less so. Oh, didn't they tell you on the door? Yes, she's here. But well, when the prince goes hunting, he locks his wife up in this big room. No one can get to her. She's water and food for a day or two, so she's fine. Really not the done thing to let a lady run free, is it? Such terrible timing. Maybe you can wait until the prince gets back with the key and then... And Silvertree hears this. And to her, it makes complete sense you'd have to lock your spouse up to keep them from escaping. The prince wouldn't want the servants to have the key. They might spirit his wife away. She's never let her own husband do this, of course, but it sort of tracks. She is incapable of imagining a truly happy marriage. And this situation might have left her with a conundrum. Does she want to try and get this door torn down, which would make her intentions very clear? Except that, well, actually, it's not too much of a problem for her. Silvertree's plan already involved a large degree of subtlety and, like a sinister Boy Scout, is there any other kind? She came prepared. May I have a moment or two in private to talk with my daughter? Just by the door, I mean. Just a friendly mother-daughter chat through the door, but don't want anyone listening in, you understand? And though they were worried, the servants couldn't really deny that request without arousing suspicion, and so they left the Queen alone. She addressed the imposing door. Gold-tree, my darling, beautiful daughter, whose radiance I know of, even if this portal separate us. You, beautiful girl, must have been easy for you to get a husband. So good-looking are you. Normal mother-daughter conversation, that. I've missed you so. Missed you too, Mum. Look, I know that something's gone wrong between the two of us, and I'm so sorry for whatever it is. I just want to make it right. Thought we could hug it out maybe, but now you're trapped in that room? Well, can't do that. She appeared to think. So, given that, and that I can't bear this continued separation between us, I know, maybe you could just stick your littlest, most delicate finger through that huge keyhole, and I'll give it a little kiss, and that can signal our reconciliation. You want that, right? Us to be friends again? Just a little kiss on your finger for a second. And though Goldtree couldn't see it, at this moment the Queen's face was overcome with a horrible grin, all lit from below, cast in long, weird shadows. And you already know that Goldtree's going to agree to this, and I find it tricky to give her the benefit of the doubt here. She does not have the defence of a certain other fairy tale character that she doesn't know she's in danger right now. No elaborate disguise here. Goldtree is completely aware. And her mother's request is strange. She has every right, every opportunity to deny it. But maybe she was worried that if she didn't do it, things would escalate, or a little part of her wanted to believe that her mother might truly have changed. And she couldn't see the harm, didn't stop and think, why is she really asking this? This doesn't sound like something she'd want to do for any non-nefarious purpose. Oh, okay, she said. Just a little kiss. Oh, by the way, everyone, this tale has now passed the Bechdel test, for what it's worth, for this lovely, endearing, heart-to-heart mother-daughter conversation. Yay! Goldtree puts her finger through the hole. Silvertree brings out a needle, and the visual storytelling demands that this needle be dripping with a viscous green, evil-looking liquid. And rather than giving her finger a little kiss, Silvertree jabs it with the poison needle. From behind the door there's a muffled "ow!" and then the sound of a body hitting the floor. And Silvertree swiftly exits. Servants are soon knocking on the door of the room, telling Goldtree, "It's all over, you can come out, she's gone." But of course there is no response. They start to panic. The key is produced, the door unlocked, but it doesn't open easily. They have to shove hard to push Goldtree's limp form inwards. Silvertree's already far away, back on her ship, cackling madly to herself, storm clouds and lightning behind her for dramatic effect, her eyes wild and mad and intense, the look of the most beautiful woman in all the world. When the prince returns, he finds his love laid out on the bed, dead. This poison, which has struck so immediately and with such lethal force, it appears almost as if she is just in a sleep, but she is not breathing. He is stricken with grief, absolutely bereft. And I do want to have a whole side wondering what effects this has on international relations, but I'm going to spare you from that and instead focus on him, his grief. A grief so vast and all-consuming. His love gone. He refuses to leave her side. Refuses to have her buried. She just looks perfect, too like her, even after a day has passed. Her skin is pallid, but she doesn't take on the appearance of a corpse. Those around the prince eventually come, try to take her away, gently suggest she must be laying in the ground for practical and religious reasons, but he will not have it. He wants to keep gazing at her, to remember her. He will not have her committed to the ground. There's unease, but he's the prince, he's in charge, and he is suffering, and the rich get an easy pass on suffering, so, well, no one can really insist anyway. Yes, they worry he might be going mad, but in the end they decide just to let him have his time. Gold Tree shall soon start to decay, to become repulsive, then he'll finally let go, reach the acceptance stage, and she can be buried. And that probably would have been how events played out, except that whatever this poison was, its secondary effect had been to perfectly preserve the victim. So a week passed, and Gold Tree looked just as she ever had, that beautiful face that only her mother couldn't love. It was almost as if she was still alive. Foreshadowing. For a good while, the prince's life was on hiatus, a morbid, gothic protagonist he would spend his days with this exquisite corpse. But eventually, as it usually does, even after the most tragic losses, everyday life, with the great silent power of routine, begins to creep back in through the cracks, re-establishing itself. Little things started to take the prince away from Gold Tree's body. He would get out more, get involved in wars, hunting, judgments, oppressing the poor, the latter in a sort of passive way, as he is basically a good guy, but that's just what his position in life sort of forces on to him. And as he did more and more of these things, there were small slivers of time when he wasn't thinking about his dead wife. And it took a longer time, a year, 2 years, until finally he was feeling about as normal as he ever would again, didn't think of his dead bride every single hour of the day, visited her still radiant corpse less and less. Eventually the world wasn't just grey. There were these small joys to be found. The scar would remain forever, but the raw wound was healed. And during all that time, Gold Tree's body did not change. She remained just as she had been at the moment of her death. So even though the prince had moved on, still he would not permit her to be buried. But one day he had left that room, locked it behind him, and never opened it again, though he carried the key with him still. And by now you might be thinking back to the introduction and starting to put 2 and 2 together. For we're almost back at the start of this episode. For the prince is eventually recovered enough to take a new bride. She once again hails from a distant land. It was the way back then. Those advisors were still plotting and scheming. But fortune favours him a second time, or maybe less fortune and more to do with his character, an appropriately fairy tale princess, a dashing lover. For once again, true love and lust blessed his marriage of political convenience. Husband and wife are soon inseparable, his relationship with her just as pure and good as that with Gold Tree had been. Now the story does not give her a name, but given her importance to what follows, I will give her one. I'm going to call her Rose. Rose and the prince. He will not get a name, just his title, by the way. No names for men in this story, just the women, as it should be. Husband and wife devoted to one another. But despite their true love, the prince does not tell her everything, does not even let on to the fact that he was previously married. He knows this is wrong, But during the marriage, well, everyone advised him strongly not to do it, to bolster his worth on the international marriage mart. He went along with it. And by the time all that changed, when the two of them were really in love, there were those montages of them skipping through daisy-filled meadows, eating ye olde ice cream and winning whatever the medieval equivalent of stuffed toys is. Taxidermied badgers, winning taxidermied badgers at fairs, all backgrounded by uplifting, joyful music. The scenes naturally interspersed with a low drone behind ominous slow zoom shots of a locked door. Well, by that point, he didn't want to risk that love by revealing how he'd lied. The classic blunder that truth will out just as sure as the toughest stains with Daz. And now we are back at one of the introductions to this episode, just as a reminder. Rose has found the key that her husband has left behind when he's gone out for a few days. Her curiosity has got the better of her. She's gone to the room. She's gone in. There, on the bed, she sees Goldtree's perfectly preserved corpse, and we join her just as the door closes behind her. And Rose stands transfixed by the awful sight, an icy terror gripping her heart, and now she's here, alone with a corpse. Her mind was racing, trying to interpret the bizarre and horrific scene which was rapidly overturning everything she knew about the life she was now trapped in. There was only really one explanation for what was happening here. She took deep breaths, tried to remain calm. But curiosity led her closer. The strangeness of the body, so like in life, quite without the stench of death. Rose's eyes rested on it, even as her mind was turning over thoughts of escape, of how she could cover up this discovery. There was no violence evident on the body at all. Rose was no stranger to death. She had seen it on the tourney field, from illnesses long and drawn out and sudden alike. And even once the effect of poison, a hazard of being a member of a royal family. And all those forms left their wretched mark upon the body. While the only blemish she could see on this beautiful woman was a little needle, still jabbed into the tip of her smallest finger, long dried blood around its base. It was so wrong, so out of place, that absent-mindedly, as most of her mind was planning how she could get her horse from the stables without arousing suspicion, Rose plucked the needle out of Goldtree's finger, and Goldtree sighed, took a deep breath, and opened her eyes. Questions, of course, come to mind here. If you're wondering how Goldtree survived so long, how she ate and breathed, and other science facts, remember, it's just a fairy tale. You really should relax. There is another question, of course, about why the prince hadn't tried pulling the needle out already. This was no piece of apple lodged in the throat hidden from view. Did he notice and just discount it, or was this just a very stereotypical masculine thing of not noticing the small details? Maybe the latter. But I'm going to set all these questions aside. Now, the extraordinary conversation that happened between Rose and Goldtree takes place off-screen, for the sake of brevity, really, and preserving some semblance of narrative urgency. But what I can tell you about it is that it went very well. Rose's many, many worries were swept away by Goldtree as the two of them pieced together what must have happened. When they'd done doing that, I'm sure they both had queries about, well, why Goldtree hadn't been buried, and why the prince hadn't told Rose about this, and why he hadn't taken out the needle. But all of those sort of paled into insignificance next to the fact that Goldtree was alive again, and the two women spent the rest of the day talking, Goldtree tucking into some food. Suddenly she was very, very hungry, and the two wives of the prince got on wonderfully, really well. So well that they barely considered the very negative situation that this resurrection created. That both of them being the living wife of the prince couldn't last for long. This was surely to result in a classic love triangle, even though it's a quite unclassic origin for one. They had so much to talk about. They spent that day getting to know one another, and the hours passed in the blink of an eye, as did the hours of the next day, and they only really stopped talking when the prince arrived, back late that second evening, but days before he was due back, having realised the key was not with him. And he burst into the house, or castle, or palace. I think I've been a bit inconsistent here. But he burst into it, all in a panic. Rose went to greet him. When the prince saw his wife, he could tell from her countenance that she knew. But in her eyes he did not see the anger, the fear that he had spent the whole rushed journeys home so worried about. That was strangely absent. Even so, he was on his knees apologising, even before she could say anything. And Rose recognised now the pain that he carried with him for what it was. And now she understood its source. She was filled with nothing but sympathy for him. "My darling, it's okay, really it is. Look, I have something to tell you. In fact, you know what? It's better I just show you." And Goldtree stepped into the room. The prince was completely overcome. He stammered questions for a little bit, but soon he was just swept away as he found himself kissing Goldtree with the greatest of ardour, telling her how fervently he loved her, weeping. He couldn't believe it. For Goldtree, for whom mentally less than 2 days had passed since she saw him, this was all pretty overwhelming and a little odd, but she kissed him back equally fervently. There were a good few minutes when they were just talking to each other, kissing each other, all alone in their own little world. Rose stood there awkwardly, until eventually both of them became aware of her presence, and turned to her. "Rose," started the prince. "No," she said. "It's okay. Goldtree was here first. I'll be the one to leave." The prince and Goldtree both looked at her, pained at how their joy meant her sadness. But that's how it had to be, right? There's only one amicable resolution to a situation like this, right? If multiple people are in love, one person has to lose out. At least that's what centuries, millennia of media, of storytelling have told us. But as Rose turned to leave, Goldtree ignored all of that. Broke the rules. She spoke up. "But I don't want you to leave. Don't leave." Rose turned back. The prince looked from Goldtree in his arms up at Rose. "And I don't want you to leave either. Do not ask me to choose between you. You have both bewitched my body and soul. Stay." And naturally, Goldtree and the prince opened their arms to Rose, who paused only a moment before joining her husband and his wife in a joyful, loving embrace. And listener, I am very pleased to report that she did stay. All three of them together, and indeed in very little time at all. A great affection developed between Rose and Goldtree as well, so that all of them were individually and collectively in love with each other. People disapproved of this setup, of course, despite the fact that this was, as I've mentioned a few times, a society where a man was expected to marry not for love, and to have other partners on the side. That was normal. But openly loving two people at once, all of them falling in love with each other, not just cheating, you can't do that. If people just did what they like, honest and open with each other, well, it just won't do at all. But though the people might have disapproved, well, he was the prince. So they sort of had to be okay with it, at least on the surface, even if they wished he'd be the more lying and cheating and whoring sort. The oppressive state power of monarchy did have its benefits. Full-on polyamory broke out here, a trope in stories that is so much rarer than in real life that it's basically this tale, Dr. Odyssey, and nothing in between the two, with the medical scenarios being about equally implausible in both. So, all three of them were blissfully united. The prince with his two wives, a happy ending on the horizon despite everything, or it would be, if it wasn't for one malicious fish in a pool in the forests of Scotland. Silvertree had not learned anything. Having finally killed her own daughter, she could be sure now that she was the most beautiful woman in the world. Should have been happy with that, should have left alone. But that awful insecurity stayed with her. And one day she suddenly realised she hadn't eaten the heart and liver, had she? Oh no! She needed reassurance. And the only reassurance that was good enough for her was not her husband or courtiers or anyone, but the magical trout. And back to him she goes, after Goldtree's resurrection and her successful exploration of the world of ethical non-monogamy, unbeknownst to Silvertree, of course. Bonnie wee troutie, I am now the most beautiful woman in all the world. Yes, yes. No, laughed the fish. Of course not. Goldtree is more beautiful than you. We've been round this before. No, I killed my daughter. I stabbed her with a poison needle. I heard her fall. Shouldn't have used a poison that just put someone into suspended animation, really, should you? Actually, quite hard to find that, I would have thought. You must have gone to some effort to seek out such an ineffective poison. There was a side note. What a substance! Have you considered its application in medicine, in times of famine, long sea journeys? That thing could potentially revolutionise huge areas of human existence. Maybe, suggested the fish, you could devote some time looking at that, perhaps, push the frontiers of knowledge, improve people's lives, be beautiful inside and out. I don't care about any of that. I must be the most beautiful. Or, of course, yes, you could be so fundamentally broken that you don't focus on what good you could do and instead just try to kill your daughter, eat her organs. This tracks with the behaviour of human beings in positions of power, so I'm not surprised. But I just thought I would give you the option. I'm going to murder her. Enjoy. Sure that will go well for you this time. Third time's the charm, eh? For what it's worth, if you want to find her, she's living with the same husband she was before. Bye. Now the king, knowing that his wife had gone to visit Goldtree previously, when she said unexpectedly, I'm taking the longship out again to go and see Goldtree, he was surprised. Goldtree, she's alive? Silvertree just glared at him. Seems like it. The king was sort of relieved. He'd assumed his wife had murdered her back when she took her last trip. I'm kind of past giving this guy any sort of pass, though. Yes, he didn't murder his own daughter, but I'd rather place the bar at a higher level than a particularly athletic snail could clear. As neglectful fathers go, the king really does wear the fucking crown. Silvertree once again took command of the longship herself. The ship was sighted off the coast of Denmark, but once again the prince was away. He liked his hunting. Goldtree was all of a panic when the sail was sighted. She knew what her mum was capable of. My mum has come to kill me again, she said to Rose. We must pretend not to be here. We must flee. But Rose, who, of course, had heard all the backstory as basically the first thing that she knew about Goldtree, had a very different idea. Oh no. I think I'd like to meet your mother, actually. And Goldtree was afraid, but she had a great trust in Rose. They met on the beach. Hello, darling, said Silvertree. Pleased to see you again. You look well, somehow. She wasn't hiding her loathing now. She took barely a second to size Rose up, judged her to be attractive, but not as attractive as her daughter, so no threat to her. Not that any woman would be a threat once she had eaten Goldtree's heart and liver, and she turned her attention fully back towards her daughter, just half-arsing it. I brought you a special drink, it's very nice, valuable or something. And in her hand there was a goblet which she thrust forward. Drink this, my darling. You might not know this, chipped in Rose, but there is a custom in this country that a person who offers a drink first takes a draught themselves. And Silvertree turned her attention to Rose now, seeing her more properly. No, servant girl, we are doing this my way. "Oh, I am no servant," said Rose, stepping forward. "I am Rose, Princess of 2 lands, mistress of that castle, lover of your daughter, and I must insist that we show you the hospitality that you are due." She took one more step forward, and in one fluid motion that took Silvertree entirely by surprise, Rose reached up to the goblet, grabbed a hold of it, and forced it into the wicked queen's open mouth, tipped it up. It was barely a splash that made it onto her tongue before Silvertree recovered enough to cast the vessel away, but that was enough. As the acrid poison hit her throat, she gave a great cry. Steam rose. She fell down, clutching her throat, convulsed on the ground for a few moments. Rose and Goldtree stepped back, and after a horrible moment or two, Silvertree lay dead in front of them. And that was that. Sometimes the resolution to the story is simply to murder the bad guy. Simple, but effective. Silvertree was not coming back. They made absolutely sure to bury her. And so I would now like to welcome Rose as the newest member of the podcast, favourite or possibly second favourite reoccurring character, the justified murder princess, and a bisexual badass one at that, I very much stan. And after all this time, Goldtree was finally safe and secure with her family. Like a great many fairy stories, this is a tale about how awful your parents can be. But also a tale about how that means you shouldn't give up hope. For there are others who aren't like your parents out there. People who can be far more a family than they ever were. A family that might not look how you expect it to look. A prince unable to let go who's always off hunting at crucial moments, and his second wife who discovers you unconscious in his room and then resurrects you and murders your mother. While it might not look how society expects it to, this family contains the real ingredient of family that can never come from simple lineage. True love. And maybe this resolution was what the fish had seen, was actually the outcome it intended all along by setting these events in motion. Or maybe it waits still in a pool in Scotland, hoping to stir the pot of social anxieties until they become a destructive madness, which would certainly explain a lot about the way the world seems to be going. But let's not end on that. Let's concentrate instead on Goldtree, together with her 2 lovers, Rose and the prince. The prince who had not done a great deal but had at least not buried her when he really should have, and Rose who had saved her life twice. The tale says that from now on they were together, pleased and at peace. Eventually they would become the king and queens of the land. Maybe in doing so they would introduce their subjects to the idea of ethical non-monogamy, and their subjects would in turn consider the possibility of alternate relationship formats rather than accepting monogamy as the default. And while some would find fulfilment in those, others, having given the idea due consideration, would more purposely opt into their existing monogamous relationships, so strengthening them. Possibly. And just this once, I'm going to say it. They all lived happily ever after. A happy ending there, and what a delightfully untraditional one. This is one of my favourite fairy tales from Britain at least. It's really just for that joyous ending. The prince's wife being the one to save Goldtree. No heroic prince here at all, really. He doesn't wake her, he doesn't save her from the evil queen. And of course, I also like that very unusual polyamorous ending. You know how much I love relationship dynamics that are outside the norm and justified murderous women. Future Graham just jumping in here before we get any further into this discussion section. I just want to say that I had terrible difficulties recording this discussion section for various reasons, and in the end I had to record it 4 times. By the end I think I might have been losing the plot a little. I have tried to make sure that this does make sense despite all of that. Hopefully you get something out of it, but it is much more rambly even than usual. And there may still be some artifacts of the technical difficulty left in there as well. That health warning given, let's continue. I will put my cards on the table here and say that in the original, while it is still polyamory, it is just 2 wives for the prince who don't get together. But given how much the new wife, who I called Rose, seemed to care about Goldtree, I thought it just makes sense. Now, the villain in this tale is, of course, another woman, not great for the old female solidarity thing, but with a certain degree of realism. However, I think an argument can still be made, to the annoyance of any right-wing listeners I've somehow still got, that the real villain is patriarchal beauty standards here and how they warped Silvertree. Though actually just as valid and possibly a more valid interpretation is that the villain behind the villain here is less beauty standards and more just old people in general. This is actually a theme which is very common to fairy tales. Old people, particularly but not exclusively parents, are the enemy of the young. Now, despite how common this theme is, I basically think no Disney movie pulls this out, neither does the standard repertoire of literary fairy tales. They use stepmothers in particular, as if it's the newcomer that's the problem. But in a lot of the original fairy tales, an obvious take is that the older generation hates and are a very real danger to the younger one. Tales like this one of intrafamilial generational conflict with the elder as the instigators. Tales where your dad wants to rape you or rape your wife and your mum wants to kill and often eat you, and your dad doesn't really prevent it. Can't understand why this theme hasn't much made it into the stories that parents tell their children or our family movies, despite how relevant it is to, well, the modern world. Baffling that. Okay, I don't think that was actually a very helpful way to introduce the discussion section, so let's start more sensibly with the origin of this tale. I feel I have to say that this tale was popularised by Joseph Jacobs in his 1892 work Celtic Fairy Tales. Jacob, who I've mentioned before, was a prolific Australian folklorist living in Britain who did a lot of work popularising British folk tales in the late 19th and early 20th century. His books, which were collections of folk and fairy tales, became the widest sold and best known fairy tale collections from Britain and Ireland, and basically form the basis of widespread public knowledge of British fairy tales since then. I'm using the term folk and fairy tale sort of interchangeably here because that's how he used them, calling everything a fairy tale, even things taken, for instance, from Irish mythology. I also don't want to go down the rabbit hole of getting into the difference between folk tales and fairy tales. Fairy tales are a kind of folk tale, though it is a bit woolly. Goldtree and Silvertree is generally recognised as a fairy tale, so I'm going to use the term fairy tale throughout this discussion section. Please do recognise that they're just a type of folk tale and the distinction might not actually be that important. Now, while Jacobs popularised it, he didn't typically collect his stories direct from oral storytellers. He instead copied or adapted them from pre-existing written sources, and he was very careful to acknowledge these sources, even the ones who didn't acknowledge the oral storytellers they'd taken them from. Which is a shame because now it says on Wikipedia, on Google AI, that Joseph Jacobs collected this story, even though he's very keen to point out that he didn't, that he took it from an 1888 work, the Celtic Magazine, which was a journal, where it was noted as collected by Kenneth MacLeod. MacLeod, later Reverend MacLeod, is a much more obscure figure than Jacobs, but was a man who was actively collecting songs and folk tales in Scotland, particularly in the Highlands and Western Islands, making him the podcast's favourite reoccurring character and 19th century folklore collector. MacLeod's version, published in the Celtic Magazine, was written and presumably collected in Gaelic, but also helpfully translated into English, helpfully for people like me. It's worth noting that in that magazine it's also noted he collected another version of that tale at the same time, and for the discussion to come that is particularly relevant. He doesn't produce that story in full, just summarises it, but it clearly had some considerable differences. Not least that the women aren't giving names, no Goldtree or Silvertree. The fish is replaced with a witch, the daughter runs away to live with a henwife and then is married to the prince later, and crucially, at the end, the prince only ends up with one wife, the new one leaving. And that article in Celtic Magazine 1888 is the entire origin of this story as we have it. But this brings us on to talk about something that is so big, I think that it's potentially a podcast series in length. So I'm going to go over it in a very rushed manner here. And that is to discuss the broader set of fairy tales in which this story sits. because unlike a lot of stories I cover on this podcast, this is one which, as you have probably worked out, crops up in various different guises elsewhere. In fact, a lot elsewhere. Stories with similar elements to this have been told for a long time across a huge geographical area, and of course are very well known today, because Gold Tree and Silver Tree is a variant of a very well known international interlinguistic tale, the most common version of which today is of course Snow White. For the purposes of this discussion, I'm going to assume you are familiar with the standard Disney version of Snow White, even if not the film itself, but seven dwarves and poisoned apples and all of that. And there are obviously similarities and differences between Gold Tree and Silver Tree in that tale, but rather than running through those, I think it's more important to appreciate that Snow White is itself but one of many variants of a tale. Yes, it's the version that's most popular, but that's pretty much due to luck. It was a grim collected tale that they rewrote several times, and then it was picked up in 1937, made into the first Disney princess film, cementing its legacy. And in the Arne Thompson-Ufer system of classification for fairy tales, Snow White Tales is number 709. But none of this means that Snow White is the archetype from which all other variations of the tale were taken or are simply sort of spun off. Snow White is just one amongst many, just the one that happened to get popular. And when it comes to these tales classified under the ATU, the Arne Thompson-Ufer Index, the only things that really seem to be common to all Snow White story variants that I can tease out is one woman is jealous of another. Often, this is a mother of a daughter, but not always. 2, the younger woman is at some point put into a death-like sleep. 3, from which she eventually wakes. And that's about it. And the point I sort of want to make to you here is that even though these are classified together, there's a huge variety between them. A rapid-fire look at some of the more common variants of this tale from across Europe, though there are many, many, many. Maria and the Seven Robbers. In this one, a stepmother convinces a father to leave his daughter, Maria, in the forest, Hansel and Gretel-like. Instead of dwarves, it's robbers who are good, who find her. There's a poison ring rather than an apple, and though Maria gets saved in this version, nothing ever happens to the evil queen. Little Toute Belle from France. In this one, it's dragons rather than dwarves, dragons who live down a well, and Toute Belle wears a poisoned dress. I kid you not. There's the Crystal Casket Italian one. In this one, there's fairies, there's a poisoned dress, and the prince who marries her thinks she's a doll at the point that he marries her when she's in her animated state. Though she does eventually wake up, he marries her thinking she's a doll, which is all levels of just fucked up. And then there's also an eagle. The Young Slave. This one, Italian as well, has muddled the form quite a lot. In this one, interestingly, the girl is not poisoned by her mother, but is in the state of suspended animation beforehand. She is in her uncle's house. He's done the thing where his wife isn't allowed in to the room. She goes in anyway, finds this woman, gets jealous of her, who knows what exactly she thinks is going on, manages to wake her up, but then rather than saying, yay, we've woken this person up, she makes her into their slave. I hope you're keeping up with this. I'm trying to get a complex plot very quickly, and I'm very bad at that. So she's made the niece into a slave. At some point there's an actual doll who comes to life, but does very little, but the uncle finds out eventually that the slave is his niece, reawoken from suspended animation, and oh no, they've been mistreating their slave, who is actually his niece, which is terrible, only because she's a niece, not because slavery is in any way bad. Then they drive his wife away, and I was shocked to find, given what I know about this sort of tale, that he doesn't actually marry his niece, she gets married to somebody else. There are many, many more. If I wanted to be pedantic with the way I defined the Snow White tales a couple of minutes ago, you could say that the Greek tale of Cupid and Psyche, dating back to at least the 2nd century AD, well, that contains a jealous woman and it contains a sleep-like death. So you could say that fits into this category, and I think there's definitely elements there that have transmitted to these later tales, so this is a very old tale indeed. In the Arne Thompson-Ufer Index, they also reference tale type 709A, the Sisters of Nine Brothers, where a woman is similarly put in a magical coma, but for different reasons. There's also sometimes jealousy there, And there's a changeling. Sleeping Beauty is another tale with similarities. I could go on at great length. I mean, this tale often also contains themes from another tale type, the Maiden with No Hands, though I have neither the time nor the expertise to do a podcast series on this incredibly extensive legend type. Though I have linked an article from Writing in the Margins on my website who has done a lot more work in this area. And I should definitely mention here a totally different type of tale that sort of appears in this one, which is Bluebeard. Bluebeard has a dead body inside a room where the wife isn't allowed in and the husband carries a key. Bluebeard is not quite as widely known as Snow White, but I think you probably still recognise it. But if not, then know that in that tale, when the wife finds the body, it is the body of the husband's previously murdered wives. Usually multiple because he's a serial killer. So Gold Tree and Silver Tree uses that same idea but resolves it completely differently. And it's not the only Snow White variant tale to do this, by the way. Quite a few of them do have the wife discovering the body with the husband keeping the key and then changing that Bluebeard formula all around. So the conclusion kind of is that Gold Tree and Silver Tree is a tale which combines elements from various widely told tales. And this leads me to a broader point that I sort of want to go off on one now, which I'm going to prefix by saying I am not an expert, and I'm just giving my inexpert opinion. But for what it's worth, I have some doubts about the utility of categorising them into these neat categories, the ATU types, precisely because there is so much crossover and intermixing. Now, countless academics have disagreed with me here, and I don't want to throw the whole thing away, that's not what I'm proposing, but I think that variants really don't tell the whole story here. When looking at this tale, I find it much more illuminating to consider how it relates to other tales, not by its single category, but rather by comparison of the many tropes which it contains. Or, in the academic folktale world, the motifs. Thompson, one of the people who created the ATU Fairy Tale Index, also created a motif index. This is basically plot elements that crop up across tales. By combining them in different ways, you can make radically different stories with very different plots and yet drawn from the same sort of sources. The motif index basically operates like a folktale version of the website TV Tropes. And if you don't know the website TV Tropes, and I strongly suggest you do, it's an absolutely fascinating website, well, it basically operates like a modern-day media version of the Stiff-Thompson Motif Index. And what both of them do is they highlight repeated elements that crop up in stories, and this can be things that define almost the entire story to just little incidental asides. If you're not sure of what a trope is, here are some examples that just came to mind when I started thinking about it, randomly basically, though I'm sure they all have entries on TV Tropes. A detective gathers everyone in the room at the end of a story to announce who the murderer is. Two people who are going to be lovers meet each other, have a misunderstanding, and become enemies at first. The protagonist wakes in a fantasy world where they are now an item of furniture. Someone is hit on the head, forgets everything, gets hit on the head again at the end of the episode, and remembers everything. That kind of thing, of which there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, and just for those ones we recognise now, so there have been throughout recorded history. A large part of storytelling can just be assembling these together, taking bits from this story or that story, inserting them into another, discarding other bits. It has always been so, and by putting these tropes together differently, you can tell radically different stories with radically different morals and structure. And you may think the distinction I am drawing here is very academic. And it is, and fundamentally it doesn't matter that much. But I think what bothers me a little, I mean, I'm not getting any sleepless nights over it, but a little, is that Gold Tree and Silver Tree you often see described as the Scottish Snow White, which is a helpful shorthand, and yes, it features in that folktale category. But if you're too rigid with this, if you always describe it like that, I think what that leads anyone who's not looking in detail to think is, oh, this is basically Snow White with a sort of paint job done on it. And that's not really the case. It's a lot more different than that, and it doesn't owe its origin to Snow White, just changed. And similarly, that's not the case of those other Snow White, inverted commas, tales I told earlier. Each of them really does stand alone, and by sort of classifying all these into story types, I think the discussion potentially limits the type of stories that can be told, by sort of implying they're all just the same, whereas, for instance, I think Gold Tree and Silver Tree and Snow White are distinct enough tales with distinct enough elements that, actually, they stand alone and can stand aside each other. Well, there are parallels, there are big differences, and there's no difference as big as the role that second wife plays. And this leads me to a whole other bunch of connected tales that I'd like to talk about here, because while there are all these poisoned, falling asleep women getting resurrected Snow White stories, there's also a different strand of tales that much more focus on the second wife. They also have the falling asleep element, but they don't usually have a villain. And here I'm in debt to 19th century folklorist Alfred Nutt for this. He wrote the most widely cited, the longest article about Gold Tree and Silver Tree, and he compares it to a 12th century poem written by Marie of France called The Lay of Eliduc. And that poem is set in Brittany and Great Britain, telling of a knight who has to leave his wife behind, goes off to England for a bit. When he's in England, he falls in love with the King of England's daughter. They sort of hook up. When she finds out that he's got a wife, she passes out. In that same way, can't be woken up, magical slumber, but no poison involved, no villain, apart from, I suppose, him in this case. And then he brings her back, puts her up somewhere in a little place in the forest where his wife won't find her. His wife finds her, and she wakes her up. And at that point, she steps aside so that he can marry this new, younger woman, and his first wife conveniently goes off to a nunnery and leaves them together. Even though everyone's sort of consenting, it's definitely not by my mind as happy an ending as Gold Tree and Silver Tree. And that has only a passing relation to Snow White, but a much closer relation to Gold Tree and Silver Tree. So yes, the precedents to this are very old. I also think it's worth discussing, by the way, because Alfred Nutt's article on this is one of the most widely read. His idea in that article from the 1890s, which is also sort of echoed by what Joseph Jacobs says, that the whole polygamy ending is really critical in this tale, because what it means for this tale, according to them, is that this is evidence of this surviving from a time when polygamy was accepted. And Jacobs especially is very keen to say a more primitive time, not like we're living now where we'd never do such things. And that is a very 19th century folklorist view on this kind of thing. And while it's a very appealing argument, I am really not very convinced by it. To explain why, well, I think one of the key things against it, in my mind, is that Gold Tree and Silver Tree is the only story like this that I've come across, at least, where the two-wife ending results in there being two wives. This includes, of course, that other tale from Scotland collected at the same time by MacLeod that I referenced earlier. It also includes another Scottish tale collected a couple of years later, which, while it involves the old wife allowing the new wife to stay, eventually ends up with the new wife married to the king of all people. As in the original king, not the prince's father. It also includes the variant of the tale that is closest to this one that I've come across, which is the Bright Star of Ireland, collected as part of the Irish Folklore Commission's work in the 1930s. That version includes a talking fish, it has the whole locked room thing, and has the second wife stopping the wicked queen from killing the daughter. So much more similar to this than Snow White is. It does, though, feature cats, sadly lacking from Gold Tree and Silver Tree, though they are evil cats. But crucially, despite those similarities, the second wife steps aside at the end of that tale like she does in the Lay of Eliduc 800 odd years earlier. But Alfred Nutt argues strongly that this is the original tale from which all of these sort of tales were taken in a more unadulterated form. And as part of his argument, he marshals the fact that there are Irish myths that include polygamy as a feature of them, which is definitely true. And I'm open to the idea that at some point in the past there is an ending to this tale which has polygamy as the ending, which has a happy polyg that isn't Gold Tree and Silver Tree. But it is notable that the only editions collected in the 800 odd years beforehand don't have that as the ending. This was at a time when folklorists often saw folk stories as windows to the dim and distant past, transmitted unchanged for huge amounts of time. And while that's certainly not impossible, it's not where much modern academic thinking on this is, and I also think it's a lot less likely for stories like this. Stories that have a huge number of variants, where tellers clearly feel that they're not trying to preserve something, that they can mess around with the format of it to make it more entertaining. This is a story that lots of people are telling. There are lots of versions of it. I very much doubt that this one version in the Highlands somehow retained this element where nowhere else does. It just doesn't sort of make much sense. It's much more likely to me, therefore, that some individual teller made this version. Don't know who that person is, don't know when. Could have been the person who literally MacLeod collected it from, could have been well before then. And I think they probably changed the ending to make it either more shocking or so that nobody had an unhappy ending. Nobody had to be sent away. And I'm really going out on a limb here with this one, by the way. Total supposition. But if that is the case, then I'm going to say that I like that storyteller. If they changed it to make it more scandalous, or if it was so everyone was happy, those both seem like very good intentions when telling a story. Okay, that was a lot more rambly even than I normally am. Hopefully something clear came out of that. 2 more points I've written down here. First of all, the hazelnuts. The hazelnuts do not feature in the original tale. That's the hazelnuts in Irish mythology, which I reference in the Fionn tales. That is a real part of Irish mythology. They give the fish knowledge, but that doesn't appear in this. I just sort of thought that combining those two worked nicely. Also, the names, Gold Tree and Silver Tree. It feels like those names should be important somehow, that they should link to other stories somehow, and they don't really meaningfully. There are other stories with gold trees and silver trees featuring, diamond trees as well, but no real linkages there. It might be that I and other people have looked at this just have missed something in the Gaelic, but I don't think so. Not really sure what's going on there. Obviously, as I mentioned during the episode, it does seem bizarre naming your daughter Gold Tree when you're called Silver Tree and you have jealousy issues, but what can you do? Even in the stories that are quite like this one, those names don't crop up, so could be something there, but not really a lot to say about it. So, in conclusion, what is the conclusion here? The conclusion is that I'd like to think of Gold Tree and Silver Tree as, rather than being a variant of Snow White, as containing lots of tropes of many stories told right across Europe and beyond for a very, very long time by tale tellers who could just mix things up as they pleased to some extent to create all these new and interesting stories, and that in doing that for Gold Tree and Silver Tree, this became the only one that I know of, and please correct me if I'm wrong, with a happy polyamorous ending. And that makes it a damn good special one, in my opinion. Okay, that is it. Discussion section over. A nice long episode for you there. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'm going to end now on my usual massive thanks to all of you who are listening to this right now, who made it through this and are presumably enjoying it, for your kindness in listening, for your comments, for your support, for all of those who signed up to Patreon. I have a Patreon. Sign up there if you want extra episodes. You only pay when I make an extra episode. And the next thing I'm working on is actually a Patreon episode. Especially thanks to Janine Liberty, who signed up since the last episode. That's it, guys. As I said before, this podcast is continuing irregularly as ever. The next main feed episode will be about mermaids, but we won't be going to the ocean, for these mermaids live up in the mountains. I do hope you can join me for that. You can follow Tales of Britain and Ireland podcast on Blue Sky, Instagram, Threads and Facebook. There's also a website, talesofbritainandireland.com, where there's a page for each episode which contains more information including illustrations, asides and recaps, along with other additional bits and pieces to explore. The intro music was written and performed by Alice Nichols, and the outro music by Mitch Keeley and Josh Newman. And you can find all the other musical credits on the episode page on the website. If you enjoyed this podcast, then please do share it with others or give it a review, as those really are the best ways to help us out. You can also join Tales of Britain and Ireland on Patreon to get extra members episodes. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope you'll join me again soon.